I don't know if I'm the only one who struggle in obeying God. Because my reason is, Lord, if only you can explain to me how you do things and why you do things, it would be easier for me to obey and trust. Can you identify? Is that also your reason? Lord, there are many things that you ask from me. There are many things that you ask us to do. But it is complicated because, Lord, we thought everything is doing well and falling into place, only to discover at the end of the rope or at the end of the stage that it is not, you're closing the door, it is not your will. In your recent experience, this may be your struggle. Today, let us reflect in God's Word, because there's a similar story in the Bible, a person who had an encounter, who faced a struggle, the same struggle that you and I may be facing, a struggle when it comes to obeying God, simply because we as human beings, we tend to analyze first things before we obey and trust. It's so hard to follow when we don't know, when we don't understand the things that we are asked of. What if, brothers and sisters, what if God does not owe us an explanation? What if God would not explain to you, and yet He asked you to do that particular thing? He asked you or He called you to do things. And what if God will not explain after all? What if the reason to obey is Himself? It is not why, it is not what, but it's who. What if God is saying to us, Anak, you obey me not because you understand, you obey and trust me because of me. Me as the one calling you to do. How many of you are familiar with General NAAMAN? If you're here for the first time, or maybe you're not familiar with the story of General NAAMAN, let me tell you the story of this man. A glimpse of the life of this man will show us of the same struggle that we have. But this man learned to obey God, and that his obedience, he discovered that his obedience, God is leading him to something greater and bigger than what he thought. So General NAAMAN, to give you the story, he was not a Jewish man. He was not from the Commonwealth of Israel. He was a Gentile from Syria, the Arameans. And just to give you a short background, the Arameans are just like the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Romans. These are threats to the national security of Israel during the time of the writing of the Old Testament. And if you're familiar with the Old Testament, if you read it, you will be surprised that God, even though He has chosen Israel to be His own people, wherein He would reveal Himself to this nation, that they will be the channel of God's revelation to the world. And yet, in the event that Israel would be undisciplined, in the event that they are disobedient, God would use foreign nation to discipline His own people. He would allow Assyrians to invade them. He would allow the Babylonians to lead them into captivity. And God would use that. And one of those countries that were a threat to them were the Arameans, the Syrians. And in this time, Israel were divided in their kingdom, there is a constant threat from the Arameans because they would occasionally raid the northern border of Israel. They would always, the Samaria part, there is an occasional raid from these Assyrians. And for them, they look at them as, these are invaders and these are people who are a threat to us. And here in chapter 5 of 2 Kings, we will see that God asked this NAAMAN, this general, a strange obedience. He responded in a call of God for strange obedience. Now, before we continue, the important thing that I want you to remember is no matter how strange what God is asking you and me this year, because I believe that New Year is just a flip of a calendar, it's a continuing obedience on our part. This man, no matter how strange, God would call us to do something for Him. Let us remember that our obedience would lead us to something bigger than what we are expecting from God. Now, 2 Kings chapter 5 will be my text today. I'll be reading from verses 1 to 19. I would lead you slowly into the story of NAAMAN as to how he encountered God, the God of Israel. Now, verse 1 says, Now NAAMAN, as the writer of 2 Kings introduced the first character, NAAMAN was commander of the army of the king of Aram. The Arameans are the Syrians. He was a great man in the sight of his master, the king, and highly regarded highly respected in his own terms, in their own nation. Why? Because in verse 2, the writer said at the outset, through him, the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier. Now, I pause for a while after reading this, and I say, the writer of 2 Kings is already telling us, linking or showing us something here that little did Naaman realize, because he was not a believer. He was from a Gentile origin. He does not believe on the revelation of God. He's ignorant about God, the God of Israel who revealed himself to this nation. And yet, little did he realize that in all his victory, it is because of the favor of God upon him. You know, God would, no matter how strong your army or your chariots, your strategy, unless God would give victory to your campaign or your endeavor, you will not succeed. Now this man, that's why I wonder why his story was included in 2 Kings, simply because God is telling us, this is very important, that He's not just the God of the Jewish people, He is also the God of the Gentiles. That He is at work even in the lives of the Gentile people in those days. Maybe we have a wrong understanding that God is only favoring Israel. No. Even in those times, God would deal and work in the lives of people who are outside of the Commonwealth of Israel. And this is one of the best examples. Now, because through him, the Lord had given victory to Aram, he did not realize this. In every person, there is this but. And here's the writer of 2 Kings. He said, but he had leprosy. This is verse 1. In spite of his success, in spite of his prestige, in spite of his being decorated general and medaled soldier, impressive war record in Syria, where people would respect and applaud him every time they would hear the name Naaman. And even in Israel, people were afraid of him because every war he went to, he would succeed. And he's the number one commander of the Arameans. And yet, the secret was revealed to us that he had leprosy. You know, what is leprosy? Leprosy is an incurable skin disease that in the time of the Israelites, for the Jewish people to be a leper or had a leprosy, you are isolated. You are outcast in Israel because they believed that you are ceremonially or religiously unclean. According to one Bible scholar, a person who have leprosy can only be declared clean or cleansed by the religious leaders or the priests, but it cannot be cured. Which means religiously they can pronounce you clean, that you are welcome back to the community, but that is an incurable disease. But for the Assyrians, they have a different perspective. That's why Naaman was welcome in Syria. Maybe they have a different outlook when it comes to this kind of disease. Or maybe Naaman was hiding it. Behind that breastplate of valor, behind that uniform, there is that weakness. Somehow we tend to think that way now. That person is very successful. That person is so handsome and so beautiful and we wonder what's the secret, what's the weakness. And for Naaman is that sickness that he was hiding behind that breastplate or that uniform. And in verse 2, look at this, how God would unfold to us his movement in the lives of Naaman. Now, bands from Aram, the writer goes saying, bands from Aram, a group of soldiers went out and had taken a captive a young girl from Israel. They had this young girl held captive, and she was given to Naaman's wife. Maybe because Naaman is the great general, you deserve this young girl, let her be your servant. Accident? Is it an accident? Was it an accident? Or maybe God is brewing something here, because this little girl, in the next verse, you would see that she discovered the secret of Naaman. Maybe only the immediate family knew what Naaman was suffering inside that beautiful uniform of valor, of being a good soldier. Maybe at night, the wife and Naaman was trying to argue about the pain. And the servant, the little girl, discovered that, and she boldly commented and said to her, if only my master, he said to the wife of Naaman, if only my master would see the prophet in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Now, pause for a while. I really admire this young girl. Maybe she was bragging that maybe an incurable, but you go to Israel, there's a prophet there that is a miracle-working prophet of God. He can heal you. He can heal my master. She found herself serving a gentle amo or a gentle employer or boss. But for her, she would not be silent, but she would speak of the God of Israel. And I wonder, we today in Singapore, we may find ourselves working in a firm or in an office, or maybe you are working as a helper in a house, in an employer, with an employer, or in a family, a foreign family, a family who is not a believer of God, and you're there placed by God for a reason. Let us not be quiet and share the goodness of the Lord. Just like this little girl who was instrumental in NAAMAN. For NAAMAN, that sound of the prophet in Israel that can cure is a sound of hope, a message of hope for him. No wonder the reaction of NAAMAN was, he went to the king of Syria, of Aram, and told him what the little girl told him from Israel. And said, this girl told me that there is a prophet or maybe a faith healer in Israel that can cure my leprosy. And you see the reaction of the king. Another favor from God. The king was so, he has high regard with NAAMAN, and the king said, by all means, what do you want me to do? I'll support you. You want me to write a letter to the king? And by the way, let us not forget, the king of Aram and the king of Israel are not in good terms. But the king was willing, okay, if that's the only way for you to get well and to be cured, let me write a letter to the king. So NAAMAN left, taking with him 10 talents of gold and silver and 10 pairs of clothing. You know why clothing? Because 10 sets of clothing in those days are very, very expensive because it's handmade. Now, for NAAMAN, not as a believer, the tendency, yes, I'll be the one in need. I will need a favor and a service from this prophet or this faith healer. I naturally would bring a lot of money because I need to pay him. So offer something in return for the gift, for the service of healing. If I may receive healing, I'm willing to pay. Maybe his style is, I can buy out. I can buy things that I want. I can offer my money. I'm rich. I can afford it. So NAAMAN continued, and here's the letter. We are given the glimpse of the content of the letter of the king. Look at the letter. It says, the letter that he took to the king of Israel read this way, with this letter I am sending you my servant NAAMAN, to you that you may cure him of his leprosy. Now, try to imagine, the story in the Bible has been squeezed so that it will be limited in the scripture. But the story is long. There are many things that happen. So let me just give you a glimpse of what happened there. Maybe from Aram, from Syria to Samaria, NAAMAN and his entourage, because he was a well-decorated general with the approval of the king. Okay, let all these attendants go with you as you seek healing from the prophet in Israel. So he went with all his entourage. Remember, he was famous. And can you imagine the watchman at the watchtower of Israel was watching on the horizon because they were always in a constant threat of invasion from foreign countries. And so this group, this band coming, a group of soldiers marching with all the chariots coming towards Israel, it created fear. But then when they look at again, for the second time, they saw white flag. And they may be saying, oh, the Arameans are coming, but they are coming in peace. They're with the white flag. What does this mean? So, and they opened the gates, and all these bands and the entourage of NAAMAN, and they saw NAAMAN, they were so scared. This is the general that would conquer everyone, every place, and he would win the battle. So in short, they opened the gates and let him present himself to the king. So as soon as the king of Israel read the letter, so the letter was given to the king, and look at the description of the writer, and he tore his robes and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? The king said, what is this, an insult? From the perspective of an Israelite, leprosy is incurable. We need a divine intervention. We need a miracle from God to heal a leper. And what is this king telling me? Is this a joke? Am I God? That's why he tore his robes. Now, in the next verse, it did not show us, but again, many things happened there. Maybe the king of Aram or the king of Israel went to his chamber, left NAAMAN for a while, went to his chamber and gathered his counselors and advisors, and they tried to process things. What is going on here? What are they trying to do? And maybe they process and realize, And they were asking themselves, why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? Is he trying to insult me? See, maybe they try to analyze things and say, now we know. He is trying to pick a fight, a quarrel with you. They did not come to war to make war with us. They came to create the reason for war. You know why? If you decline this request, Naaman would go back to the king of Syria and he will tell the king, we were denied by the king of Israel. Then the king of Aram would feel bad and say, ganun ha? They did not come to create war. They came to create the reason for war. So he tore his robes. Now, remember, people were hiding in their homes because that's Naaman. They were afraid. They were afraid of the Arameans. Look at the next line. Interesting. The news spread rapidly and it reached Elisha. Elisha was the prophet of Israel who replaced Elijah, the famous prophet Elijah. Remember? Who was anointed by God. And Elisha was doubly anointed and he performed doubly miracles than that of Elijah. And he heard. Maybe the message reached to his house and Elijah sent a messenger or a message to the king. Why have you torn your robes? He said to the king, have that man come to me and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. Now, pause for a while. You know, in the times of the kings in the Bible, not all kings of Israel are good. Not all of them are religious. Not all of them are God-fearing. Some of them forgot about the God of Israel. Maybe here, Elisha was trying to remind the king of Israel, don't forget, there is still the God of Israel is still alive. Send that man to me. Maybe the king forgot, I cannot cure this man, but my God can do this miracle. But maybe the king was not familiar. He has forgotten about the living God of Israel. And here comes Elisha as the mouthpiece of God. Bring that man to me, and I will show him. He will know that there is a God or a prophet in Israel. And what's the reaction of Naaman? He did not tarry any moment. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots, the whole entourage. Let's look for the house of Elisha the prophet. And when he reached the house of Elisha, of course, there was no doorbell. He knocked at the door, and as a general, well-decorated, who was familiar with protocol, generally, he was expecting a lot of things. And all of a sudden, the door opened slowly, and here's the servant of Elisha. The servant was scared. The servant read the note. Here's the note. So Elisha sent us a messenger to say to him, this is the message of the prophet. Go take a bath 7 times and close the door. Can you imagine? They were all scared. This is the general who killed a lot of people, and the door opened slowly, and it was not Elisha who appeared, but the servant, without even looking at the eyes of the general Naaman. He said, this is the message of the prophet. He said, go and take a bath 7 times in the Jordan River. That's all. Sabay sara ng pinto. What would you feel if you were Naaman? I came all the way from Syria. It was not a joke traveling with chariots during those times. In chariots, and yet he was expecting so much in that encounter. Look at this. Naaman went away angry and said, I thought. Expectations, no? I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call in the name of the Lord and hand over this and cure me and so on and so forth. He had this expectation. I wonder somehow in our relationship with God, when God does not move or work the way we expect Him. I thought, Lord, you would answer me this way. I thought you would answer me this manner. And we have this kind of preconceived ideas as to how God would move in our lives. And if He does not move the way we expect Him to do, we end up frustrated and disappointed. Lord, after all what I have done all the things what you, and yet, Lord, I cannot understand. That's why I struggle in obeying you, Lord. Lord, take a bath. I came all the way, and then here's the prescription. Go and take a bath. The reason of Naaman, are not Abana and Parpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than any of the waters of Israel? Why? Because Jordan River was so dirty. Here I am, I'm already infected in my skin, and you want me to take a bath in a dirty river to get more infection? That sounds absurd and silly and crazy. And yet sometimes God would ask us to do some things and He demands strange obedience from us that we do not understand and we struggle. And Lord, I can't understand. You want me to give up this relationship, this wrong relationship? You want me to leave this job? You want me to surrender this thing? You want me to give up this vice? Lord, you want me to do such things? It doesn't sound practical. Again, when Abraham was called by God, leave your country, Abraham, and go to the land I will show you. Which land, Lord? Just go and I will show you. Just go, I will show you. I don't know, just go. Lord, that sounds absurd. Lord, I leave my family? Strange obedience, no? Moses, when Moses was called by God, he was hiding in the Midian desert. He ended up shepherding flocks for Jethro. And here comes the voice of God, Moses, Moses. And then Moses answered God, and God asked him to do some things for him. And Moses reminded God, Lord, time out. You want me to be the deliverer of your people where? In Egypt? You have forgotten I'm a fugitive. I ran away from Egypt because I killed an Egyptian. Strange. Lord, are you sure? Lord, if I will only know why you're asking things, it would be easier for me to obey. How you perform, how you work in our lives. Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he was so devastated, he turned and went off in a rage. Let's go! And all the chariots, he was maybe riding in his chariots, and all the servants, maybe they were riding with him, and the servants suddenly said something to Naaman, not the little girl, but the servants, in plural term. The servants went to him and said, my father, if the prophet told you to do some great things, would you have not done it? Oh yes, I would have done it. If he said to me, climb the highest tree, or kill 1,000 Philistines, I would have done it. Or climb the Mount Everest, I would have done it. And the servant said, how much more then, when he tells you to wash and be cleansed? In other words, the servant was saying, just do it. You have nothing to lose. No matter how strange it is, how strange it sounds in your ears, what God is asking you, just do it, obey Him. Because you will realize, this is very important, you will realize that our obedience to God, the impact of our obedience is not limited in our context, in the way we are expecting God to respond. Our obedience would lead to a deeper encounter with God Himself. Because what if He is the reason to obey? Not because why or what, but because of who. That's why I like the song, because of who you are. Remember, you obey me this 2012, not because you understand, not because you figure it out. We obey God because of Him. There are many strange things that God would ask us, strange obedience on our part. It's too simple, it's too good to be true, it's too absurd, Lord. I can't understand why you're asking me to do such things. So he went down. They were traveling and they saw Jordan River. Make a detour. Naaman was rational enough. Oh yes, I have nothing to lose. Why don't I give it a try? If I'm willing to do great things, if the prophet asked me for great things, I would have done it. Now this is just simple. There's nothing wrong for me to give it a try. I have nothing to lose. So Naaman dipped himself. I don't know. I'm not sure if it happened on the first dip of Naaman. When he dipped into the water, the first dip, I don't know if his flesh was miraculously restored because it was dirty. Maybe he didn't realize it. Maybe it happened on the second, or maybe on the sixth, or maybe on the seventh. I don't know. But the Bible tells us that when he obeyed what the man of God had told him, his skin was miraculously restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Miracle happened. But the story did not end there. The story did not end there. Look at this, mga kapatid. Naaman and all his attendants and the whole entourage went back rejoicing. Probably they were amazed to the man of God. And look at this. Elisha at this time was waiting at the door of his house while the entourage of Naaman are approaching. And look what he said. Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Wow. He did not mention about his healing. His obedience led him to an encounter with God. What if the strange obedience that God is asking you and me would lead us to a deeper intimacy and an encounter with God that which we have been looking for? What if our strange obedience would lead us in knowing God more? What if that thing that God has been asking you to do, asking you to give up, asking you to let go, what if your obedience to God is the key for you to know God and encounter Him afresh, deeper? He offered Elisha some money. I have 10 silver and gold. I have 10 sets of clothing for you. Elisha, let me give you some gift, love offering. But Elisha did not accept. The prophet answered, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. Even though Naaman urged, and yet he refused. Maybe this is the reason why at the first instance, Elisha did not even face him. Because maybe Elisha was careful. He doesn't want Naaman really to associate his healing later on to him. That's why he did not appear and let him discover it and encounter God by himself. If you will not, Naaman said, he requested, this is a funny request. If you will not accept these gifts, I have requests, O my prophet. What is that? Elisha said, can I fill these 2 carts with soil from Israel? Soil? Yes, this soil, this dirt. Can I fill up my 2 carts of mule to carry back to my town some earth, some soil from your place? Because when I go back, I don't want to worship any more other gods than the God of Israel. I will not offer any burnt offerings to any other God than the God of Israel. Look at the conversion. Look at the encounter. After the healing, Naaman came back to Elisha and he did not try to figure it out. What was the secret? Elisha, was it on the 7th number? Was it in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Is there a magic powder that you have placed in Jordan River? What is the secret? He did not try to figure it out. And yet, give me some soil. Because when I go back to my own town, maybe he was thinking in my balcony, I would spread this soil and every day I would kneel down there as if I'm kneeling down in Israel. That's my sign of worshiping the God that I encountered at the Jordan River. He came for healing. He left with the God of healing. Because God has something bigger and larger than the obedience that He is asking from us. And he even asked for forgiveness. Maybe because he was a new believer, he was expecting that when I returned back to Syria, my king would not understand what happened to me. Then he would ask me to worship with him in the temple, and if by accident I would bow down to the God Rimmon, whatever that God in our place, if by accident I would bow down, may God forgive me for that little compromise. Wow. Because look at the heart of Naaman. A radical change, an encounter. That's why I believe maybe what is that God is asking of us that we have been delaying. Maybe full surrender of our lives. Maybe that's the key. That once you obey God, no matter how strange it is, that is the key, that you will encounter the God of the universe. And He would reveal Himself to us in a special way. Elisha said, go in peace. In a way, he was saying, not in war, but go to be a channel of peace. Kamusta mga kapatid? How are you? Bagong taon, Pastor Butch, ano naman yung message? I told you, New Year is just a flip of a calendar. For God, it's a continuing obedience on our part. What is God asking and telling you to do? At night, when you're praying and you close your eyes, you know that there is something that God is asking from us or from you. And we know that our strange obedience would lead us to a new relationship, a radical change, a transformed life. What if God Himself is the reason to obey? What if there's no explanation? Let us not wait. We can't figure out everything in this life. I want to understand first why things are happening. That's the very essence of trust. What if God is telling you, obey me because of me? There is an encounter that we will never experience with God until we decide to obey Him. This is probably the reason why we've been a Christian for quite some time. You've been attending the church, for us who are regular in the church. But as if God is distant, as if your spirituality is dry. Here's the closing scripture. Jesus said something. Listen very carefully. He said something in John, which is interesting, and He confirms what we are talking about. He said, whoever has my commands and obeys them. Read the Bible, the commands of the Lord is there. Whoever has my commands and obeys them, he is the one who loves me. Our obedience is the proof that we love God. He who loves me will be loved by my Father. And I too will love him and show myself to him. Obedience, strange obedience, would lead us to an encounter that we've been longing for. So no matter how strange it is, I believe so. The year 2012 is ahead of us. God will always ask from us things that may sound strange and crazy. Let go. Maybe God is saying, let go, anak. Do you trust me? Do you let me rule your life? Let go. It is when we obey that He shows Himself to us.